The expensive pen scratched across the divorce papers, each stroke cutting deeper than the last. Across the polished mahogany table, Richard's face remained impassive as he signed away 15 years of marriage. The tastefully subdued conference room in his lawyer's office seemed designed to muffle emotion. Beige walls, abstract paintings in muted colors, carpet that absorbed sound and feeling alike. "That should finalize everything," his attorney said, gathering the documents with manicured hands. "The settlement is generous, Mrs. Donovan. I think you'll find it more than fair." I didn't correct the premature removal of my married name. Instead, I maintained the careful mask I'd perfected over the past 3 months, since the day I'd found the text messages, since the night Richard had announced he'd found true love with his 28-year-old executive assistant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady. The settlement was indeed financially generous. Richard had insisted on it, perhaps to soothe his guilt, perhaps to speed the process. The family home, a substantial alimony, investment accounts. He could afford to be generous as the newly appointed CEO of Meridian Technologies. The board had announced his promotion the same week he'd told me our marriage was over. Convenient timing. My lawyer, Diana Chen, shot me a sideways glance as she collected her copy of the documents. She'd advised me to push for more, convinced I could get half of everything, but I'd declined. I didn't want his money. I had plans that wouldn't appear on any financial disclosure. Richard stood, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with the unconscious grace of a man accustomed to power. At 45, he still maintained the athletic build of his college rowing days, his dark hair now distinguished with silver at the temples. The watch on his wrist, my gift on our 10th anniversary, caught the recessed lighting. "Elena?" he said, the first word he'd spoken directly to me during the hour-long meeting. "I wish you well." The practiced sincerity in his voice made something twist inside me. I looked up at him, at the face I'd woken up beside for a decade and a half, now somehow belonging to a stranger. "Enjoy your new life, Richard," I said, the politeness of my tone belying the steel beneath. I watched a flicker of unease cross his features. Something in my eyes, perhaps, something he couldn't quite place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His new fiancée, Amber, would be waiting for him, probably in the Tesla he'd bought last month, another midlife crisis, acquisition alongside the younger woman. They were planning a destination wedding in Bali next spring. I knew this not because Richard had told me, but because Meridian's executive assistant pool still contained several friends I'd made during company functions over the years. Diana and I rode the elevator down in silence. Only when we reached the cool dimness of the parking garage did she speak. "You're sure about this, Elena? We could have gotten more." I smiled, sliding my sunglasses on. "I have everything I need. If you change your mind, we have 30 days to contest." "I won't change my mind." She looked unconvinced but nodded professionally. "Well then, it's been a pleasure working with you, Ms. Vasilyev." Hearing my maiden name again felt right. Elena. Vasilyev. I'd been Elena Donovan for so long I'd nearly forgotten the woman I was before. The woman my grandmother had raised to be resilient, strategic, and patient. Thank you, Diana, for everything. We parted ways, and I drove my Audi, another generous divorce gift, through midtown traffic toward the Riverside apartment I'd leased last month. Richard had seemed relieved when I'd moved out quickly, giving him and Amber free rein of our Westlake home with its infinity pool and wine cellar. The apartment was smaller, yes, but the unobstructed view of the river and downtown skyline provided perspective I'd been missing for years. As I navigated through the evening rush hour, my phone rang through the car speakers. The name on the display brought my first genuine smile of the day. Nadia, I answered. Perfect timing. Is it done? My oldest friend's voice was clear, direct, signed and filed. And you're okay? I'm exactly where I need to be. Nadia's short laugh held a note of approval. Phase 1 complete then. Are you coming to the office? The team is waiting for updates. 20 minutes, I confirmed, changing lanes to take the exit toward the downtown district. I'll have your coffee ready. The Ukrainian kind, not that watered-down American stuff. The call ended, and I felt the weight of the divorce proceedings start to lift. The Elena who had sat across from Richard today, quiet, acquiescent, broken, was a necessary mask. Now I could set it aside and become myself again. The parking garage beneath the unassuming office building on Harborview Drive recognized my key card. I pulled into my designated spot, gathering my purse and the slim briefcase containing my copy of the divorce papers. The private elevator required both a key card and fingerprint authentication, rising smoothly to the top floor without stopping. When the doors opened, Nadia was waiting, as promised, coffee in hand, strong, black, and sweet, the way my grandmother had taught me to drink it. At 43, my friend of 30 years still had the intense energy that had made her a championship chess player in our youth. Her dark hair was cropped short in a severe bob that suited her angular features. Her charcoal pantsuit immaculate. You look better than expected, she assessed, walking beside me down the minimalist hallway. Less murderous than I anticipated. Murder is messy, I replied, accepting the coffee. What we're doing is much more satisfying. The conference room. Doors slid open at our approach. Inside, 5 people rose from their seats around the polished table. The wall-to-wall windows showcased the river and skyline, now glowing with early evening light. A digital display on one wall showed a complex organizational chart, while another monitored financial data in real time. She's here, Nadia announced, unnecessarily. And it's done. Marcus Chen, Diana's brother and our legal strategist, stepped forward first. Congratulations on your divorce, he said, with the dry humor that made him both a brilliant attorney and terrible dinner party guest. Possibly the only time that phrase has been sincere, I replied, setting down my things. Is everything prepared for Phase 2? We're ahead of schedule, said Tariq Minan, our financial analyst. His fingers danced across his tablet. The shell, company acquisitions are complete, all routed through the offshore accounts as planned. Untraceable. And our inside access? I turned to Zoe Winters, a former Meridian programmer who'd left after Richard had passed her over for promotion 3 times in favor of less qualified men. Still active, she confirmed, her expression vindicated. Their security upgrades last month actually opened new back doors for us. I can access any system, any file, without detection. I nodded, taking my place at the head of the table. The chair felt right. Unlike the visitor's seat I'd occupied for years at Richard's company functions, smiling politely while he took credit for ideas we'd discussed at our kitchen table. And our timeline? I asked, looking to the final 2 team members. Kai Watanabe, our operations specialist, projected a detailed Gantt chart onto the main screen. Meridian announces second quarter results next Friday. They're planning to unveil their new acquisition during the same call. An acquisition they don't realize they won't be able to afford, added Emily Torres, our PR strategist, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd been Richard's executive assistant before Amber, gradually sidelined after refusing his advances. Their stock is already showing weakness based on the industry rumors we've been circulating. Perfect. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the familiar warmth of strategic momentum. Let's review our positions. For the next hour, we methodically assessed every aspect of our plan. Unlike Richard, who dominated meetings with monologues about his own brilliance, I listened more than I spoke, asking pointed questions and adjusting our approach based on team input. Meridian Technologies had been my husband's obsession for 2 decades. He'd joined as a sales associate and climbed relentlessly, crushing competitors and colleagues alike on his ascent to the executive suite. What he didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that I had been buying small parcels of Meridian stock since before we were married. The investments had started small, with money saved from my technical translator job. As Richard rose through, the ranks in our household income grew, so did my investments. Carefully channeled through various accounts, trusts, and eventually the offshore entities Marcus had helped establish. Richard had always seen my interest in his company as wifely support, never suspecting I was creating a position that would one day make me one of Meridian's largest shadow shareholders. "Elena?" Nadia said, breaking into my thoughts. Kai was asking about the board members. I refocused on the discussion. "Sorry, continue, Kai." He highlighted several names on the organizational chart. "We've identified 3 board members who are particularly vulnerable. Hamilton is overextended in his real estate investments and facing a potential margin call if property values dip. Further, Lowell's son just got accepted to Stanford but needs financial aid their family income disqualifies them from. And Chen, no relation to Marcus, has been treating a medical condition she's kept private from the board." "What's your assessment of their loyalty to Richard?" I asked. Emily answered before Kai could respond. "Situational at best. Richard stepped on all of them during his rise. They supported his CEO appointment because the previous quarters were strong, not out of personal allegiance." "Perfect," I replied. "Prepare customized approaches for each. Nothing illegal, nothing unethical. Just correctly timed information and opportunities that align with our interests." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And if personalized persuasion isn't enough?" "It will be," I said confidently, "because we'll be offering something Richard can't. Long-term stability and a lifeboat away from the acquisition disaster he's steering them toward." The meeting continued as evening deepened outside our windows. When we finally concluded, I remained behind while the others filtered out, promising to reconvene in the morning. Nadia lingered, perching on the edge of the conference table beside me. "You didn't tell them the rest," she observed. "They don't need to know yet?" "About your history with Meridian? I think it would motivate them even more." I shook my head. "This isn't just about revenge, Nadia. It's about correction, balance. Everyone on this team has their own legitimate reasons for wanting to see Richard and Meridian's current leadership held accountable." She studied me with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated chess opponents decades ago. "It's still personal for you. Beyond the divorce, beyond Richard." "Of course it is." I turned to the window, watching lights flicker across the darkening. Water. Meridian was built on my father's technology. The patents Richard's predecessor stole while my father was dying are what launched their core product line. Which is why watching Richard become CEO must have felt like the final insult, I finished for her. "Yes, but not the final move." Nadia smiled, the expression sharp with anticipation. "Speaking of moves, I had a thought about accelerating our position." She outlined her idea as we gathered our things and headed toward the elevator. By the time we reached the parking garage, we'd refined it into an actionable strategy that would shave weeks off our timeline. "Dinner?" she suggested as we approached our cars. I checked my watch. "Not tonight. I have a call with our European investors in an hour." "At least you're not spending the evening looking at old wedding photos and drinking vodka," Nadia teased. "That would be a waste of good vodka," I replied. "Besides, I've been preparing for this day since I found those texts on Richard's phone. No time for wallowing when there's a company to acquire." We parted with a brief hug, and I drove through the now quieter streets toward my apartment. Inside, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a single finger of bourbon, not to drown sorrows, but to celebrate a milestone. The apartment still held the impersonal feel of a high-end hotel, deliberately. So, I'd left almost everything behind in the house with Richard. The few personal items I'd brought were still in boxes, except for one. A framed photo of my father in his university laboratory, proudly holding the prototype that would later become Meridian's flagship product. I touched the frame gently, remembering his excitement when he'd made the breakthrough, his devastation when his partner had stolen the patents while he was undergoing cancer treatment. He'd died believing his life's work had been taken from him forever, never knowing that his daughter had spent 15 years methodically positioning herself to reclaim his legacy. My phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Diana. Final. Divorce decree expedited. You're officially Elena Vasilyev again. Congratulations. I smiled, setting down the phone and turning to my laptop. There was work to do before my investor call, numbers to review, projections to analyze, strategies to refine. The divorce had freed more than just my name. It had unleashed the focused determination I'd suppressed during years of playing the supportive corporate wife. Richard likely thought today marked the end of our story. He didn't yet realize it was merely the beginning of my own. The next morning, I arrived at our office suite before anyone else, using the quiet hours to review our financial position. Tariq's team had been accumulating Meridian shares through various proxies for months, accelerating purchases whenever the price dipped. Our current position stood at 23%, significant but still below the threshold that would trigger regulatory disclosure requirements. Zoe arrived next, already immersed in her tablet as she entered the conference room. Morning, she muttered, dropping into a chair and projecting her screen onto the wall display. You need to see this. The screen showed an internal Meridian email chain, time-stamped from late last night. Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow. Afternoon, Zoe explained. Richards informed them privately that yesterday's divorce was finalized, but he's assuring them it won't affect company operations or the acquisition timeline. I scanned the messages, noting the carefully crafted confidence in Richard's communications and the veiled concerns from board members in their responses. Interesting timing, I said. They're worried about stability during the acquisition. Exactly. And there's more. Zoe swiped to another screen. Amber's been promoted. She's now Director of Executive Operations, a newly created position, reporting directly to Richard with a salary increase of 60%. Bold move, I noted, though not surprised. Richard had always been careless with corporate resources when it benefited him personally. How's that playing internally? According to my sources, exactly as you'd expect. The executive assistant pool is furious. Several senior managers who were denied promotions last quarter due to budget constraints are updating their LinkedIn profiles. I allowed myself a small smile. Richard was creating opportunities for us without realizing it. Disgruntled employees made excellent sources of information and potential recruits. By mid-morning, our entire team had assembled, each bringing updates that fit perfectly into our evolving strategy. Marcus had identified a regulatory filing delay that would give us additional time to accumulate shares. Emily had cultivated a financial reporter who was increasingly skeptical about Meridian's acquisition target. Kai had mapped vulnerabilities in their supply chain that could be exploited, legally, to create additional pressure. We need to talk about Richard's golden parachute, Nadia said during a brief lull. If the board loses confidence in him, he still walks away with enough money to insulate him from real consequences. Unless, Marcus interjected, there's cause for termination that would void those provisions. All eyes turned to me. This was a decision I'd been contemplating for weeks. How far to push? How personal to make this? We're not fabricating misconduct, I said firmly. We don't need to. Richard's own behavior and decisions provide more than enough ammunition. I turned to Zoe. Access Richard's calendar and communications for the past 3 months. Focus on any meetings with the acquisition target that weren't properly disclosed to the board or investors. Also, pull his expense reports, cross-reference them with his actual whereabouts based on his phone's location data. Zoe's fingers flew across her keyboard. Looking for discrepancies? I'm looking for patterns, I clarified. Richard has always been meticulous about certain things and carelessly arrogant about others. Find where those tendencies create vulnerabilities. The team dispersed to their respective tasks, leaving Nadia and me alone again. You know him well, she observed. 15 years of marriage provides insights, I agreed. His greatest weakness has always been his belief in his own infallibility. He thinks he's the smartest person in every room. A common delusion among mediocre men who fail upward, Nadia remarked dryly. I shook my head. That's the thing. Richard isn't mediocre. He's genuinely talented in many ways. But he's built his success on taking credit for other people's work and pushing aside anyone who threatens his narrative. First, my father's technology, then countless ideas from colleagues and subordinates. Including yours, Nadia pointed out. Didn't deny it. Many of Meridian's strategic initiatives over the past decade had originated in conversations between Richard and me, ideas he'd later present as solely his own. I'd accepted it as part of our partnership, never imagining he would one day discard that partnership for a younger model. His board meeting is tomorrow, I said, changing the subject. We need to ensure they have certain information before they convene. The acquisition targets financial irregularities, among other things. I pulled up a document on my tablet and passed it to her. We'll anonymously provide this analysis to each board member tonight. Not enough to tank the acquisition completely, but enough to raise serious concerns about Richard's due diligence and judgment. Nadia scanned the document, her eyebrows rising. This is devastating. Where did we get this level of detail on their client losses? 3 of their former sales directors work for companies I've invested in. They were happy to provide insights in exchange for partnership opportunities. You've been planning this for years, Nadia realized, looking up from the tablet. Not exactly, I admitted. I've been building networks and relationships for years, partly out of self-preservation while married to Richard, partly because it's good business. Once I discovered his affair, I simply activated those networks with more specific purpose. The remainder of the day passed in focused activity. By evening, our anonymous information packages were delivered to each Meridian board member via different methods, some digital, some physical, all untraceable. We monitored their electronic communications, watching as they received and reacted to the materials. Hamilton's already reached out to their CFO demanding verification, Zoe reported, monitoring the email traffic. Lowell has called an auditor he trusts personally. And Chen? I asked. More cautious. She's researching independently, using resources outside Meridian's systems. Smart woman, I acknowledged. Keep tracking their responses, but maintain absolute distance. We observe only. As the team worked, I retreated to my private office, closing the door for a rare moment of reflection. On the credenza behind my desk sat another photo I'd recently unpacked. This one of Richard and me on our honeymoon in Greece, both laughing as Mediterranean waves crashed behind us. I studied his face in the photo, remembering how I'd felt then. Genuinely. Loved, respected, part of something meaningful. Had it all been illusion? Or had power and ambition gradually transformed him into someone who could discard 15 years without remorse? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Vasilyev, this is Daniel Lowell from Meridian's board. I believe we need to talk, urgently. I stared at the message, surprised by the direct approach. Lowell had always been the most straightforward of Meridian's board members, a quality Richard had often complained about. Before I could decide how to respond, another text arrived from the same number. It concerns irregularities with the Vertex acquisition and Richard's personal conduct. I'm reaching out to you specifically because of your expertise in technical translation and due diligence, not your personal connection to Richard. So that was his approach, acknowledging he knew who I was while offering a professional pretext. Clever. I drafted and deleted 3 responses before settling on. Mr. Lowell, I'm intrigued by your outreach. However, given my recent divorce, any discussion involving Meridian would require clear parameters and confidentiality assurances. His response came quickly. Understandable. My car service can bring you to my home office tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., before the emergency board meeting. Complete discretion guaranteed. I considered the offer, weighing risks against potential acceleration of our plans. Lowell reaching out directly wasn't something we'd anticipated at this stage, but it could provide valuable insights into the board's thinking. Agreed, I replied. Please text the car details in the morning. I set down the phone, my mind already gaming out scenarios for tomorrow's unexpected meeting. Lowell's outreach suggested the board's confidence in Richard was more fragile than we'd realized. If even one board member was actively seeking outside perspective, others might follow. Phase 2 of our plan was unfolding faster than projected, exactly as a good strategy should, adapting to changing conditions while maintaining its core objectives. Return to the conference room, where the team was still monitoring Meridian's internal communications. We have a new development, I announced. I'm meeting with board member Lowell tomorrow morning. The surprised reactions confirmed that sometimes, even the best planned operations benefit from unexpected opportunities. He reached out directly? Marcus asked, already considering the legal implications. Yes, and if he's reaching out to me, he may be contacting others with knowledge of Meridian's operations. Or it could be a trap, Kai suggested cautiously. Richard realizing something's happening and using Lowell to gather intelligence. Possible but unlikely, I replied. The nature of the outreach suggests genuine concern about the acquisition. Either way, we'll proceed carefully. As night fell and the team gradually dispersed, I remained, reviewing everything we knew about Daniel Lowell. His history, his motivations, his relationship with Richard. Understanding people had always been my strength, one Richard had often utilized but never fully appreciated. Tomorrow, I would leverage that strength independently, not as Richard's supportive wife, but as his most formidable adversary. In my apartment later that night, I selected my outfit for the Lowell meeting with strategic precision. A charcoal gray suit that conveyed professional authority without ostentation, accented with a single piece of subtle jewelry. Not the wealthy divorcee, not the scorned wife, but the capable businesswoman with valuable insights. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed once more. A text from Diana. Richard filed expedited paperwork to change company stock options to his new fiancée. Thought you should know. So he was. Already transferring assets to Amber, assets that were partly built on my uncredited contributions to Meridian's success. Rather than anger, I felt a curious sense of confirmation. Richard remained predictable even now. I sent a brief thanks to Diana before turning off my phone. Tomorrow would be pivotal, the day Richard's carefully constructed narrative would begin. To unravel, thread by strategic thread. Sleep came easily, untroubled by the emotional turmoil conventional wisdom might expect from a newly divorced woman. But then, nothing about my approach had been conventional. While Richard believed he was moving forward into a new chapter with his young fiancée, he remained oblivious to the fact that he was actually moving precisely according to a strategic framework I had designed. His freedom was illusory. His future, already mapped. And by this time tomorrow, the first irreversible cracks would appear in the pedestal he'd spent a career constructing beneath himself. Dawn broke with a crimson streak across the steel-gray sky as I sipped my coffee on the apartment balcony. The car Lowell had promised arrived precisely at 6:30 a.m., a discreet black sedan with tinted windows, the driver professional and silent. We glided through near-empty streets, the city still shaking off its slumber. Lowell's home office turned out to be a converted boathouse overlooking the lake, separate from his colonial-style mansion visible through the trees. The isolated setting guaranteed privacy. No assistants, no household staff, no electronic devices to monitor our conversation. Daniel Lowell met me at the door, his imposing height and shock of white hair making him instantly recognizable from Meridian's annual reports. At 68, he retained the straight-backed posture of his military background, though his weathered face showed the strain of recent concerns. "Ms. Vasilyev," he greeted me, using my maiden name deliberately. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Your message was compelling," I replied, accepting his handshake but maintaining professional distance. He led me into a wood-paneled room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the misty lake. Unlike the sterile corporate environments Richard preferred, Lowell's space held history, nautical maps, family photographs, books that showed actual use rather than decorative purpose. "Coffee?" he offered, gesturing toward a silver service on a side table. "Already caffeinated, thank you." "Then let's not waste time." He settled into a leather chair, motioning for me to take its companion. "I received some troubling information yesterday regarding Meridian's acquisition of Vertex Technologies." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm curious why you'd discuss this with me, Mr. Lowell." "Daniel, please." He leaned forward slightly. "And let's be direct. I know exactly who you are, beyond being Richard's ex-wife. Your father was Anton Vasilyev, whose pioneering work in quantum encryption became Meridian's foundation. You've spent the past decade as one of the foremost technical translators in cybersecurity, with clients including 3 Fortune 100 companies. My surprise must have shown despite my efforts to control it. I do my homework, Ms. Vasilyev. Always. Have. It's why I'm still alive after 3 tours in places the government still won't acknowledge existed. Elena, then, I conceded, though I'm still waiting to understand the purpose of this meeting. Lowell nodded, respecting the boundary. The board is meeting this afternoon to approve Richard's acquisition of Vertex. On paper, it looks transformative. Complementary technology, expanded market share, reasonable premium over current valuation. But? I prompted when he paused. But yesterday I received documentation suggesting Vertex has been systematically misrepresenting their client retention rates, revenue projections, and technology readiness. He studied my face. Documentation remarkably similar to analysis I commissioned privately 2 weeks ago, but never shared with anyone. The implication hung between us. The information we'd anonymously provided wasn't entirely new to him. He'd already harbored doubts. "That sounds concerning," I offered carefully. "Indeed." His weathered hands rested on the chair arms, completely. Still, the trained stillness of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. Particularly since Richard has personally championed this acquisition, staking his early CEO tenure on its success. "I've been divorced for precisely 36 hours, I reminded him. Richard's business decisions are no longer my concern. Lowell's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. "The board values loyalty, Elena, but we value competence more. Richard's leadership was unanimously approved partially based on his presentation of the Vertex opportunity. If his judgment proves fundamentally flawed so early in his tenure, he..." Left the sentence unfinished, watching me closely. "What exactly are you asking of me?" I kept my tone measured, revealing nothing. "Your expertise. Your insight." He reached for a folder on the side table. "Officially, I'm hiring your translation services to review Vertex's international client agreements, many of which are in languages you specialize in. Unofficially, I'm asking you to tell me if Meridian is making a catastrophic mistake." He opened the folder, revealing a consulting contract with my name already filled in. The compensation was significant, deliberately so. "This feels inappropriate given my recent connection to Richard," I deflected, though the opportunity aligned perfectly with our strategy. "On the contrary, your experience makes you uniquely qualified to evaluate both the technical aspects and Richard's potential blind spots." Lowell slid the contract toward me. "And while I understand personal feelings might complicate matters, I suspect you're precisely the kind of professional who separates emotion from analysis." I allowed a calculated hesitation before responding. I'd need complete access. Financial records, client agreements, technical documentation, naturally. And my findings would remain confidential between us until I provide a final assessment? Contractually guaranteed. He tapped the document. Though time is of essence, the board votes at 4 p.m. today. I picked up the contract, scanning its provisions with practiced precision. Everything appeared legitimate, a standard consulting agreement with rigorous confidentiality clauses protecting both parties. You understand this places me in a delicate position, I said, setting the contract down without signing. I understand it gives you an opportunity to ensure your father's legacy isn't squandered on a reckless acquisition. Lowell's direct approach cut through pretense. Richard may have walked away from your marriage, but that doesn't mean you must stand by while he potentially destroys the company built on Anton Vasiliev's innovations. The invocation of my father wasn't subtle, but it was effective. Lowell had indeed done his research. I'll need 2 hours to review the materials, I said, picking up the pen. And I'll require secure digital access to Vertex's complete due diligence package. Already arranged. Lowell produced a secure tablet from his desk drawer as I signed the agreement. Everything Meridian has on Vertex is loaded here, with the same access level board members received. As I accepted the device, our eyes met in mutual understanding. He was using me to confirm his suspicions while providing himself plausible deniability. I was gaining legitimate access to information that would accelerate our timeline by weeks. Both of us were pursuing separate agendas while maintaining the veneer of straightforward business engagement. I'll have preliminary findings for you by noon, I promised, standing to signal the meeting's conclusion. My driver will return for you at 11:30, Lowell confirmed, rising as well. I appreciate your discretion, Elena. Discretion is the foundation of my profession, I assured him, though not necessarily in the way he assumed. The drive back to my office was spent scanning through the tablet's contents, marveling at the comprehensive access Lowell had provided. Every financial statement, every technical specification, every communication between Meridian and Vertex, all available without the digital footprints Zoe's backdoor methods would have created. Nadia was waiting when I arrived, concern evident in her posture as she paced our empty conference room. That was a risk, she said without preamble. Going alone. We had no surveillance, no backup plan. Lowell's too smart for conventional surveillance, I replied, connecting the tablet to our secure system, and sometimes calculated risks yield exceptional rewards. Her eyes widened as she saw the data flowing onto our screens. He gave you full access? Legitimate board-level access, I confirmed, complete with an official consulting contract, and payment to insulate him from accusations of impropriety. Clever man. Desperate man, I corrected. He suspects the acquisition is flawed, but needs confirmation before challenging Richard directly. The office gradually filled as our team arrived, each reaction to the Lowell development more astonished than the last. While they processed the implications, I focused on mining the data for the specific weaknesses we needed. Elena, Zoe called after 20 minutes of intensive analysis. You need to see this. She projected a series of internal communications between Richard and Vertex's CFO, exchanges that notably weren't included in the materials provided to Meridian's board. They restructured the earn-out provisions, Zoe explained, highlighting key sections. The original agreement required Vertex to maintain 90% of their current clients for Meridian to pay the full acquisition price. But 3 weeks ago, Richard quietly agreed to modify that to 60% retention with no corresponding reduction in purchase price. Marcus whistled softly. That's corporate suicide if their client list is already shaky. Which it is, Tariq confirmed from his workstation. I've cross-referenced their claimed client roster against public records and LinkedIn profiles. At least 30% of their supposed active enterprise clients have already migrated to competitors or developed in-house solutions. I processed this information, fitting it into our emerging strategy. Can we verify when Richard became aware of the client retention issues? Emily projected another document onto the main screen. According to this email chain from his executive assistant, the previous one, not Amber, a Vertex whistleblower contacted Richard directly 6 weeks ago with concerns about inflated client numbers, which he buried, I concluded. Instead of bringing it to the board, he renegotiated terms to protect Vertex at Meridian's expense. But why? Kai questioned. What does Richard gain by overpaying for an underperforming company? The answer emerged as we dug deeper. Buried within Vertex's complex ownership structure was a shell company that had recently acquired 7% of Vertex shares. A shell company registered to the same Cayman Islands address used by Richard's personal investment vehicle. He's double-dipping, Marcus realized, using Meridian's funds to acquire a company he secretly owns part of. Classic self-dealing, Nadia confirmed. Possibly criminal, definitely a breach of fiduciary duty. I checked the time, 10:45 a.m. Compile everything into a comprehensive analysis. Focus on 3 areas: client retention misrepresentation, technology readiness overstatement, and Richard's undisclosed conflict of interest. I need it ready before I meet Lowell at noon. The team worked with coordinated precision, transforming complex data points into a coherent narrative of deception and self-interest. By 11:20, we had produced a devastating assessment of the Vertex acquisition, one supported entirely by Meridian's own internal documents rather than our independent research. Will Lowell act on this? Tariq asked as I prepared to leave. He has a fiduciary responsibility to, I replied. The question is whether he'll confront Richard privately first or bring it directly to the board. Either way, Marcus noted, Richard won't go down without a fight. I'm counting on it, I said, gathering my materials. His defensiveness will only strengthen our position. Lowell's driver arrived precisely on schedule. During the return trip to the boathouse, I mentally prepared for the delicate conversation ahead, balancing professional detachment with just enough personal insight to make my analysis compelling. The lake had lost its morning mist, now sparkling under midday sun as I entered Lowell's office. A lunch spread had been arranged on a side table, but the board member's tense expression suggested appetite wasn't his priority. You found something, he stated rather than asked, recognizing the gravity in my demeanor. Several somethings, I confirmed, placing my tablet on his desk. None of them favorable to the acquisition. For the next 40 minutes, I walked him through our findings, carefully presenting each revelation as if I'd discovered it during my contracted review rather than through our team's collective analysis. Lowell asked pointed questions, his military training evident in the precise way he processed complex information without emotional interference. When I reached the conflict of interest discovery, he stopped me. Wait. He leaned forward, scrutinizing the ownership diagram I'd displayed. You're telling me Richard holds an undisclosed stake in Vertex through this Cayman entity? 7%, I confirmed. Acquired 6 weeks ago through a series of transactions designed to obscure beneficial ownership, the same time frame when he renegotiated the earnout provisions to Vertex's advantage. Lowell was silent for a long moment, the muscle in his jaw working as he processed the implications. You understand what you're suggesting? He finally asked. I'm not suggesting anything, I replied carefully. I'm simply presenting documented facts based on materials you provided. The interpretation is yours to make. He nodded once, accepting the distinction. If accurate, this wouldn't just torpedo the acquisition. It would end Richard's career at Meridian. That would be a board decision, I noted with practiced neutrality. Lowell's weathered hand reached for his secure phone. I need to contact the other board members immediately. The vote cannot proceed without this information. My contract specifies confidentiality, I reminded him. Your findings will remain anonymous for now, he assured me. But they must be shared. As he began composing messages to his fellow board members, I maintained my professional demeanor while inwardly acknowledging a critical milestone achieved. Phase 2 was accelerating beyond our most optimistic projections. I should leave you to address this with your colleagues, I said, gathering my things. My written analysis will be delivered securely within the hour. Lowell looked up, conflict evident in his expression. Elena, I want to be clear about something. When I engaged you this morning, I suspected irregularities with Vertex. But this, he gestured toward the tablet, this level of deception and self-dealing, I didn't anticipate. Few people expect betrayal until they experience it firsthand, I replied, allowing just enough personal sentiment to resonate with him, especially from those they've trusted implicitly. Understanding passed between us, he recognizing the dual meaning in my words, I acknowledging the difficult position I'd placed him in with his CEO. The board meeting has been moved up to 2 p.m., he informed me, checking messages on his phone. Emergency session, closed door. Richards has been notified but not informed of the specific agenda change. Then I'll ensure you have my complete analysis within the next 30 minutes, I promised, accepting his firm handshake before departing. The drive back to our office provided necessary time to process the rapid developments. Richard would soon face direct confrontation about his deception. His reaction would be defensive, possibly irrational. We needed to be prepared for various scenarios, including desperate countermoves. The team was waiting when I returned, their expressions eager. For updates. It's happening, I announced. Emergency board meeting at 2 p.m. They're moving faster than we anticipated. Richard's been notified? Nadia asked. Of the meeting, not the reason, I confirmed. Lowell is sharing our findings with the other members privately before they convene. We need visibility into that meeting, Zoe stated, already turning to Y, her workstation. Give me 20 minutes to ensure our access is undetectable. While she worked her technical magic, the rest of us huddled to adjust our strategy for the accelerated timeline. Meridian's stock will take a hit once news of the acquisition's failure breaks, Tariq noted. We should prepare to increase our position during the dip. Already arranged, Nadia confirmed. Buy orders programmed to execute at predetermined price points, all through separate entities to avoid triggering disclosure requirements. What about Richard's golden parachute? Marcus asked, returning to our previous discussion. Even if they remove him as CEO, he walks away with millions. Unless they can prove cause. They'll have cause, I assured him. Self-dealing of this magnitude violates both his employment contract and securities regulations. Emily, who had been monitoring media channels, looked up from her tablet. Financial reporters are already picking up whispers about the emergency meeting. No details yet, but market watchers are speculating. Perfect, I responded. Speculation creates uncertainty, which feeds volatility. I'm in, Zoe announced triumphantly. Board meeting room cameras and audio now accessible through our secure server. They won't detect the intrusion. Legal reminder, Marcus interjected, ever the attorney. We're monitoring only. No interference, no recording for external use. I nodded agreement, though privately I knew documentation might prove necessary later. Our strategy required flexibility within ethical boundaries. At precisely 1:55 p.m., we gathered around the conference room display as Zoe activated the live feed. From Meridian's boardroom, the image showed board members already seated, tension evident in their postures. Richard had not yet arrived. Audio coming through now, Zoe confirmed, adjusting settings. Absolutely stunned by these revelations, Hamilton was saying, his normally florid face ashen. If verified, this represents an unconscionable breach of trust. The documentation appears conclusive, Chen responded, her usually reserved manner now sharp with anger. The question becomes how to proceed without destabilizing the company further. The boardroom door opened, revealing Richard in his characteristic power stance, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, the posture of someone accustomed to controlling rooms. He faltered momentarily upon registering the unusual atmosphere, then recovered with practiced smoothness. "Ladies, gentlemen," he greeted them, moving toward his chair at the head of the table. "I understand we've moved the Vertex discussion forward. Excellent initiative. I'm eager to finalize this transformative acquisition." No one responded to his attempted jovial tone. Lowell, seated opposite Richard's position, placed a folder deliberately in the center of the table. "Before we discuss Vertex further," he stated, his military bearing more pronounced than usual, "the board has some questions regarding information that's recently come to our attention." Richard's smile remained fixed, though I, knowing his expressions intimately after 15 years, detected the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Of course," he replied, remaining standing rather than taking his seat. "What additional information could you need?" The due diligence package was comprehensive. "Was it?" Chen challenged, unusual emotion coloring her typically measured tone. "Because it appears significant findings were deliberately omitted from the materials provided to this board." Richard's expression shifted subtly, calculation replacing confidence. "If there were omissions, they were administrative oversights, not deliberate exclusions." "Administrative oversights," Hamilton repeated with undisguised skepticism. "Like failing to disclose your personal financial interest in Vertex through Caribbean shell companies." The room fell silent as Richard processed this direct confrontation. His reaction would be crucial. Contrition might salvage something from the situation, while defensiveness would accelerate his downfall. Predictably, he chose the latter. "I'm not sure what you're implying," he began, his tone hardening. "But I resent the insinuation of impropriety. My investment activities are private and entirely separate from my responsibilities as CEO. Not when those investments create direct conflicts of interest regarding company acquisitions," Lowell countered, opening the folder to reveal highlighted documents, "particularly when combined with evidence that you concealed Vertex's client retention problems from this board while renegotiating terms to their benefit." Richard's face flushed with the distinctive color I recognized as precursor to his most volatile responses, the ones usually reserved for private settings where witnesses were limited. "These accusations are outrageous," he snapped, abandoning his carefully cultivated executive persona. "And I'm curious about their timing and source. Perhaps someone with a personal vendetta? Someone recently separated from the company's interests?" His implied reference to me caused several board members to exchange glances. "The information's source is irrelevant if the content is accurate," Chen stated firmly, "and our preliminary verification suggests it is." "I demand to know who's behind this," Richard insisted, his voice rising. "This has all the hallmarks of a coordinated attack on my leadership, possibly orchestrated by competitors or disgruntled former employees. Or perhaps," Lowell suggested with dangerous quietness, "it's simply the inevitable discovery of actions you took believing they would remain concealed." Richard's gaze locked onto Lowell, recognition dawning that the older man might be his most immediate threat. "Daniel, we've known each other for years. Surely you're not taking these ridiculous allegations seriously without allowing me proper opportunity to address them." "That's precisely why we're here, Richard," Lowell replied evenly. "This is your opportunity. The evidence suggests you knowingly pursued an acquisition that benefits you personally while potentially harming Meridian. We're asking for your explanation." For a moment, Richard seemed to realize the gravity of his situation. He slowly lowered himself into his chair, buying time to formulate a response. "The Vertex acquisition remains valuable to Meridian regardless of any personal investments I may have made," he finally said, attempting to regain composure. "My belief in their technology and market position was so strong that I chose to invest personally, a vote of confidence, not a conflict. After receiving whistleblower information about misrepresented client retention, Hamilton pressed, information you withheld from this board while simultaneously weakening contractual protections for Meridian? Richard's jaw tightened. Market? Conditions required flexibility in negotiations. The fundamental value proposition remains sound. That's not the assessment of independent experts who've reviewed the complete data, Chen countered, tapping another document in the folder. As Richard began a technical defense of Vertex's technology, always his fallback when challenged, I watched the board members' expressions. Their initial shock had hardened into resolution. The decision had effectively been made before Richard even entered the room. Lowell allowed him to finish his increasingly desperate justification before delivering the final blow. Richard, in light of these revelations, the board has unanimously agreed to postpone the Vertex acquisition indefinitely pending complete investigation. He paused, maintaining direct eye contact. Furthermore, we are placing you on administrative leave effective immediately while we review these apparent violations of your fiduciary responsibilities. The shock on Richard's face was profound, genuine disbelief that his carefully constructed narrative had collapsed so completely. You can't be serious, he stammered. This company needs me to navigate the current market transition. This acquisition is terminated, Chen interrupted firmly. And your access to company systems will be suspended as of this meeting's conclusion. This is Elena's doing, isn't it? Richard demanded, desperation giving way to anger. She's always been jealous of my success, and now she's using my personal situation to undermine me professionally. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances at this outburst, exactly the emotional response that would confirm their decision was correct. Richard, Lowell said, his tone conveying finality. Your personal circumstances are your own concern. This board's decision is based solely on documented evidence of potential misconduct in your executive capacity. I suggest you contact your attorney. As Richard continued protesting, security personnel appeared discreetly at the boardroom entrance, a contingency Lowell had apparently arranged in advance. In our conference room, watching the scene unfold exactly as we'd envisioned, I maintained calm while my team exchanged victorious glances. Phase 2 wasn't just successful, it had exceeded our expectations in both timing and completeness. Richard's rapid downfall, however, was merely prelude. The real objective, reclaiming my father's legacy by taking control of Meridian, remained ahead. As Richard was escorted from the boardroom, his professional reputation in tatters, I turned to my team with quiet determination. Phase 3 begins now, I announced, and Richard isn't going to see it coming any more than he saw this. The board's emergency session continued for another hour after Richard's dramatic exit. We observed in silence as they appointed Lowell, Interim CEO, established an independent investigation committee, and crafted a carefully worded press release that emphasized corporate governance without explicitly detailing Richard's alleged misconduct. They're protecting the stock price, Tariq noted as we watched Chen methodically edit the announcement. Transparent enough to satisfy regulatory requirements without triggering market panic. Smart approach, I acknowledged. Though it won't prevent significant volatility once trading opens tomorrow. Zoe muted the feed as the board meeting concluded, turning to face our team. Richard's been locked out of all systems. IT is changing access credentials for sensitive databases and securing his electronic devices. How long until he realizes the extent of what's happening? Kai asked. He already knows, I replied, recalling the flash of comprehension I'd seen in Richard's eyes when Lowell mentioned the investigation. His immediate concern will be preserving his golden parachute and reputation. He'll contact his lawyer within the hour. And Amber? Emily inquired, voicing the question several were likely considering. She's still director of executive operations. Not for long, Marcus predicted. The board will review all of Richard's recent personnel decisions, especially those involving personal relationships. We should monitor her communications, Nadia suggested. She may have access to information or systems that could be useful. I considered this briefly before shaking my head. Unnecessary risk. She'll be contained once the board begins their formal investigation. Our focus needs to remain on Phase 3. I turned to the whiteboard where our strategic timeline was outlined in Nadia's precise handwriting. The original schedule had Phase 3, consolidating our ownership position and approaching key shareholders, beginning next week. Now, with Richard's unexpected suspension, we needed to accelerate. Tariq, recalibrate our acquisition strategy for the new timeline. We need to maximize our position during tomorrow's inevitable stock price volatility. Already modeling scenarios, he confirmed. Initial projections suggest a 15-20% drop at market open, potentially recovering 5 to 8% by close as analysts digest the leadership change. Marcus, prepare communications for Meridian's major institutional investors. We'll need to move quickly once they start questioning the company's stability. On it, he replied. Several have personal connections to Richard. They'll be concerned about succession planning. Zoe, maintain our observation capabilities, but with extreme caution. The board will be hyper-vigilant about security now. She nodded, already implementing additional safeguards for our digital operations. Emily, monitor all media channels and social platforms. Create real-time alerts for any mentions of Richard, Meridian, or the acquisition. Priority keywords programmed, she confirmed, including mentions of your name, Elena, in case Richard attempts to publicly connect you to the situation. Kai, you're on executive assessment. I need comprehensive profiles of all potential internal candidates who might compete with Lowell for permanent CEO consideration. Analyzing leadership bench now, he responded. Preliminary review suggests 3 viable internal candidates, 2 of whom were previously sidelined by Richard. I turned finally to Nadia, who had been silently observing our team's coordinated response. And you're with me for shareholder strategy. We need to identify vulnerable positions and potential allies among the institutional investors. She nodded agreement, her expression thoughtful. What about Lowell? His position just changed dramatically. Indeed, I acknowledged. He's moved from board member to interim CEO, and from useful resource to potential obstacle. Or potential ally, Nadia countered. He clearly values your insight. His outreach wasn't accidental. Precisely why we need to reassess the relationship carefully, I replied. His interests aligned with ours regarding Richard's removal. They may diverge significantly when it comes to Meridian's future leadership. A notification chimed on several screens simultaneously. Meridian's press release had been distributed. The carefully worded announcement confirmed Richard's temporary leave of absence to address governance concerns and Lowell's appointment as interim CEO, effective immediately. The Vertex acquisition was described as under comprehensive review, pending further diligence. Market reaction was immediate despite the late afternoon timing. Meridian stock began dropping in after-hours trading, creating the volatility we'd anticipated. It's beginning, Tariq observed, monitoring the financial dashboards. Initial sell-off exactly as projected. Our secure phone line rang. Diana. Chen, my divorce attorney and Marcus's sister. Elena, she began without preamble when I answered. Richard's attorney just called me demanding to know if you're behind the board's actions. He's threatening to contest the divorce settlement on grounds of concealment and malicious intent. I switched the call to speaker so the team could hear. On what basis? Our divorce was finalized before any board action occurred. He's grasping at straws, Diana confirmed. But he made specific allegations about your working with Meridian board members while still negotiating the divorce. Claimed you deliberately accepted a lesser settlement knowing you were orchestrating Richard's removal. Completely unfounded, I replied truthfully. My consulting arrangement with Lowell began after the divorce was finalized. Everything is documented with proper timestamps. That's what I told him, Diana said. But Richard is apparently insisting you've been planning this for months, liquidating assets, establishing shell companies, even coordinating with disgruntled employees. I exchanged glances with the team. Richard's accusations, while exaggerated, weren't entirely wrong. We had indeed been methodically positioning ourselves, though never in ways that violated any legal or ethical boundaries. Let him make formal allegations if he wants, I instructed Diana. Any attempt to reopen the divorce will just create additional exposure for him regarding his affair with Amber, which wouldn't help his current professional situation. I'll communicate that, Diana agreed. But be prepared for more direct approaches. Richard apparently indicated he wants to speak with you personally. After concluding the call, I turned back to the team. Richard's beginning to connect the dots. Sooner than expected, but not outside our contingency planning. Will he try to contact you directly? Emily asked. Almost certainly, I confirmed. His pattern when cornered is to attempt personal negotiation rather than working through proper channels. He believes his charm is more effective than his lawyers. And if he does? Nadia pressed. I'll listen, I said simply. Information flows both ways in conversations. Whatever he reveals might prove useful. As evening approached, we continued refining our strategy, making incremental adjustments based on developing information. Meridian's stock had dropped 18% in after-hours trading, slightly exceeding Tariq's projections. Financial news outlets were running breaking stories, most focusing on the aborted Vertex acquisition rather than Richard's personal conduct. Zoe, who had maintained monitoring of Meridian's internal communications, suddenly straightened at her workstation. Movement in Richard's office, she reported. Amber's packing personal items. Security is present. We watched as the young woman who had replaced me in Richard's life methodically filled bankers' boxes with photographs, awards, and other personal effects. Her expression remained composed, but the tension in her movements betrayed emotional strain. Board acted quickly, Marcus observed. They're not waiting for the formal investigation to address the relationship issue. Standard protocol, I noted. The potential conflict of interest is too obvious to ignore, especially given her recent promotion. A notification appeared on Zoe's screen. Incoming text to your personal phone, Elena, from Richard's new number. I checked the message. We need to talk. Tonight. This has gone far enough. I know you're behind it. Predictable, I commented, showing the screen to Nadia. He's skipping the reflection stage and moving directly to blame assignment. Are you going to respond? She asked. Not immediately. Let him sit with his uncertainty. While the team continued working, I stepped into my private office for a moment of strategic contemplation. Richard's direct outreach confirmed his growing suspicion of my involvement, a development we'd anticipated, though not quite this quickly. His emotional response could either benefit our plans or complicate them, depending on how it manifested. My desk phone rang, Lowell's private line, not routed through assistants or gatekeepers. Elena, he began when I answered. I wanted to thank you personally for your consulting work today. Your analysis was instrumental in preventing a potentially disastrous acquisition. I merely presented the facts as I found them, I replied neutrally. The board made its own determinations. Indeed, he paused briefly. I've been asked to continue as Interim CEO while the board conducts a proper executive search. Given your unique perspective on Meridian's technology and market position, I'd like to engage your services on a more comprehensive basis during this transition period. The offer was unexpected, not in its substance, but in its timing. Lowell was moving to solidify his position faster than we'd projected. That's a flattering offer, I responded carefully, but I'm not sure the board would approve further involvement from Richard's ex-wife during this sensitive period. The board is precisely who suggested it, Lowell countered. Your technical expertise and industry connections are viewed as valuable assets, completely separate from your previous marital relationship. I allowed a measured silence before answering. I'd need to consider potential conflicts with my existing clients. Of course, he agreed readily. Take whatever time you need, though not too much. We're announcing a strategic review of all pending initiatives next week, and your input would be particularly valuable. After concluding the call, I returned to the main conference room, where the team awaited updates. Lowell's offering me a formal consulting role during his interim CEO tenure, I informed them, apparently with board approval. Interesting, Nadia commented. They're moving faster than expected to establish the post-Richard era. And trying to keep you close, Marcus added, either because they value your insight or want to monitor your involvement. Likely both, I acknowledged. The question is whether accepting serves our objectives. It provides legitimate access to information and leadership, Kai noted, without the need for our current monitoring methods. But potentially restricts your freedom of action, Tariq countered. As a formal consultant, you'd have fiduciary responsibilities to Meridian that might conflict with our acquisition strategy. Before I could respond, another notification appeared. Richard calling my cell phone directly. Time to hear what he has to say, I decided, accepting the call on speaker. Elena. His voice carried the forced control I recognized from tense negotiations. Richard, containing his anger to achieve tactical advantage. We need to talk. In person. Hello, Richard, I replied evenly. I'm not sure what we have to discuss. Don't play innocent, he snapped, control already slipping. You've orchestrated this entire situation. The board, the acquisition, the suspension, it has your fingerprints everywhere. The board made its own decisions based on factual information about your conduct, I responded, maintaining calm. Information you apparently withheld from them deliberately. This isn't about Vertex, Richard insisted. This is about revenge. You couldn't accept that our marriage was over, so you've manufactured this crisis to punish me. I signaled the team to remain silent, though several were visibly reacting to his accusation. Richard, you ended our marriage to pursue a relationship with your much younger assistant, whom you then inappropriately promoted. You concealed material information from your board while personally investing in an acquisition target. Those are your actions, not mine. You've been planning this for months, he persisted. The divorce settlement, you deliberately asked for less than you could have gotten. I couldn't figure out why until now. Perhaps I simply wanted a clean break, I suggested. Not everything is a conspiracy against you. I want to meet, he demanded, ignoring my response. Tonight. We can still resolve this before it goes further. Further. Then your board suspending you and canceling your flagship acquisition? I allowed a touch of incredulity to enter my tone. I'm not sure what you think I can do about decisions they've already made. You know exactly what you've done, Richard insisted. And this isn't over. If you won't meet me voluntarily, I'll make sure everyone knows about your involvement, including your questionable financial activities. An interesting threat, suggesting he had uncovered something about our preparation. I caught Marcus's attention, silently questioning how serious this might be. He shook his head slightly, confirming our legal exposure was minimal. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Richard, I observed, which seems ill-advised given your current circumstances. His frustrated exhalation carried clearly through the speaker. Damn it, Elena, just meet me. 1 hour. The suspension can still be reversed if we present a united front to the board. I don't see how my involvement would influence the board's decision regarding your conduct. Because they trust you, he exclaimed, revealing more than he likely intended. Lowell practically worships your father's memory, and now he's acting like you're the second coming of Anton Vasilyev. If you tell them this acquisition matter was overblown, they'll listen. This unguarded admission confirmed what we'd suspected. The board, particularly Lowell, had connected me to my father's legacy more explicitly than Richard had realized. "I can't misrepresent facts to the board, Richard," I replied firmly. "And, frankly, I'm concerned about your suggestion that I should." "1 hour," he repeated, desperation now evident. "The River Lounge, 9 o'clock, private booth in the back. If you ever cared about me at all, you'll be there." He ended the call before I could respond, a classic Richard Power move, creating artificial urgency while attempting to control the parameters of engagement. "That was informative," Nadia observed after a moment of silence. "He's panicking," Kai agreed, desperately searching for someone to blame rather than accepting responsibility. "More importantly," Emily added, "he seems to have glimpsed your connections to the board. He realizes you have influence he didn't anticipate." I nodded thoughtfully. "He's also suggested he has some knowledge of our financial activities, though likely nothing substantial given Marcus's confidence." "Should we be concerned?" Tariq asked. "Cautious, not concerned," I clarified. "Richard often implies knowledge he doesn't possess as a negotiating tactic." "Are you going to meet him?" Zoe asked the question everyone was considering. I checked. The time, 7:35 p.m. "Yes, but not at his chosen location or time. I'll suggest an alternative." "It's risky," Nadia cautioned. "He's emotional and unpredictable right now, which makes this the perfect opportunity to assess exactly what he knows." "And fears?" I countered. "Information we can use in Phase 3. The team exchanged glances, concerned but trusting my judgment. I had navigated Richard's temperament for 15 years. I understood his patterns better than anyone. I texted a response. "Not River Lounge. Harrison Hotel lobby, 8:30, public space, 30 minutes maximum." His reply came almost immediately. "Fine. Come alone." I almost smiled at the melodramatic instruction. Apparently, I'm meeting my ex-husband for a clandestine rendezvous where he'll likely attempt to intimidate or manipulate me into helping salvage his career. "Standard Tuesday evening," Nadia quipped, breaking the tension. "Want me to position backup nearby?" "Not necessary," I assured her. "The Harrison lobby is very public, with excellent security cameras. Richard won't risk creating a scene that might further damage his reputation." While the team continued monitoring developments, I prepared for the unexpected meeting. This wasn't about wardrobe psychology, as with Lowell. Richard knew me too well for subtle visual manipulation. Instead, I focused on mental preparation, anticipating his likely approaches and planning measured responses that would extract maximum information while revealing minimum intention. I arrived at the Harrison Hotel 10 minutes early, selecting a seating area with clear sightlines to all entrances. The elegant lobby, with its soaring ceilings and contemporary art installations, provided the perfect balance of privacy and public exposure. Conversations wouldn't be overheard, but any inappropriate behavior would be immediately visible to hotel staff and guests. Richard arrived exactly at 8:30, still wearing the suit from the board meeting, though now lacking a tie and looking considerably more disheveled. He spotted me immediately, his stride purposeful as he approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting opposite me without offering a handshake or other greeting. "You indicated it was important," I replied neutrally. He studied me for a moment, searching for weaknesses or tells. "You look well. Divorce agrees with you. Did you ask to meet to discuss my appearance?" "No." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I want to understand exactly what you hope to achieve with this vendetta." "There is no vendetta, Richard. You made poor decisions regarding Vertex and your personal investments. The board responded accordingly. And you just happened to provide them the exact information they needed, packaged perfectly for maximum impact?" His skepticism was palpable. "After 15 years of marriage, I know your methodical approach. This was planned." I maintained eye contact without defensiveness. "The board member approached me based on my professional expertise. I provided factual analysis. If the facts were damaging, that's because your actions were problematic. This goes beyond Vertex, Richard insisted. Someone's been accumulating Meridian shares through various entities for months, someone with intimate knowledge of our operations and vulnerabilities. So he had discovered portions of our strategy, not surprising given his financial acumen, but potentially concerning depending on how much he'd pieced together. Meridian is a publicly traded company, I reminded him. Investors make decisions based on available information every day. These aren't ordinary investors, he countered. These are coordinated purchases through shell companies that coincidentally intensified after you found those texts on my phone. His direct reference to the affair's discovery was meant to provoke an emotional response, confirmation that this was indeed personal revenge. I remained composed. Your personal conduct and professional decisions appear to have created various complications, I observed. Blaming external conspiracies seems less productive than addressing those issues directly. Frustration flashed across his features. Stop with the calm, measured responses. You destroyed everything I've built because I fell in love with someone else. Just admit it. Several nearby hotel guests glanced our way at his raised voice. Richard noticed their attention and visibly fought to regain composure. I'm offering you a chance to end this before it goes further, he continued, voice lowered but intensity unchanged. Tell the board you shared incomplete information. Express concerns about the investigation's potential impact on company stability. We can still salvage the situation. And why would I do that? I asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Because despite everything, we built something together, he replied, attempting sincerity. 15 years, Elena. That has to count for something. It counted for very little when you decided to pursue your executive assistant, I noted without rancor. Why should it suddenly matter now? He changed tactics, leaning back with forced casualness. Fine. If appeals to our history don't move you, perhaps self-interest will. Your consulting arrangement with Lowell could be interpreted as inappropriate. A board member sharing confidential information with an outside party who happens to be the CEO's estranged wife. There are securities implications. Former wife, I corrected. And my consulting agreement was properly executed with appropriate confidentiality provisions. The board was fully informed. After the fact, Richard countered. If this situation becomes publicly contentious, your professional reputation could suffer collateral damage. This veiled threat revealed his next likely move, attempting to discredit my professional standing if I wouldn't assist his rehabilitation. Predictable, but potentially troublesome. Richard, I said with quiet firmness, I understand you're searching for solutions to a difficult situation. But threatening me won't improve your position with the board. I'm not threatening, he insisted. I'm pointing out mutual interests. My reputation affects yours. My fall from grace impacts you by association. Our association ended with the divorce, I reminded him. My professional standing is entirely separate from your current difficulties. He studied me again, calculation replacing frustration. You've changed. There's something different about you beyond the divorce. People evolve, I replied simply. No, this is more specific. His eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. It's like you're enjoying this, like you've been waiting for this moment. I checked my watch deliberately. Our 30 minutes is nearly up, and we don't seem to be reaching productive conclusions. Wait. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. There's something you should know before you align yourself further with Lowell and the board. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. The Vertex acquisition wasn't my idea originally, he said, voice lowered conspiratorially. It came from Mitchell, Jackson Mitchell, chairman of Meridian's board and Richard's longtime mentor. This was unexpected information. Mitchell encouraged the acquisition even after preliminary due diligence raised red flags, Richard continued. He has connections to Vertex's founder that weren't disclosed to other board members. Why are you telling me this? Because the board is scapegoating me for decisions that originated higher up, he claimed. If you're positioning yourself as Lowell's strategic partner, you should know the full picture. Mitchell will sacrifice anyone to protect himself, including you, if necessary. Whether this revelation was accurate or fabricated manipulation, it provided valuable insight into Richard's thinking. He was already constructing a narrative that distributed blame away from himself. I'll take that under advisement, I said, rising to indicate our meeting had concluded. Good evening, Richard. Elena. He remained seated, looking up with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. Whatever you think of me personally, be careful with Meridian. There are currents beneath. The surface you might not fully appreciate. After 15 years as your wife, I assure you I understand currents beneath surfaces quite well, I replied, allowing myself the small satisfaction of that parting observation before walking away. The drive back to our office provided necessary time to process the encounter. Richard's revelations about Mitchell, if true, added a new dimension to our strategy. The chairman's potential involvement in the Vertex situation could provide leverage or create additional complications. The team was waiting when I returned, eager for updates on the unexpected meeting. Richard is more aware of our share accumulation than we anticipated, I informed them as I settled at the conference table. Though he doesn't appear to have identified the specific entities or the full extent of our position. That's concerning but manageable, Tariq assessed. The purchases were deliberately structured to withstand regulatory scrutiny. More interestingly, I continued, he implicated board chairman Mitchell in the Vertex deal, claimed the acquisition was Mitchell's initiative, pushed despite early warning signs. Can we verify that? Nadia asked. Zoe was already typing. I'll check internal communications between Mitchell and Richard going back 6 months. If there's evidence, we'll find it. This could be simple deflection, Marcus cautioned. Richard? Trying to distribute blame rather than accept responsibility. Possibly, I acknowledged. But if there's truth to it, Mitchell's involvement creates both risks and opportunities for our strategy. And Lowell's consulting offer? Kai asked. Richard seemed to view that relationship as threatening, which confirms it potentially provides valuable positioning, I replied. I'm inclined to accept with carefully defined parameters that don't conflict with our acquisition objectives. We spent the next hour refining our approach based on these new developments. Richard's unexpected revelations had added complexity to our strategy, but hadn't fundamentally altered its trajectory. If anything, the potential Mitchell connection provided additional leverage points we hadn't previously identified. As midnight approached, I reviewed our progress with Nadia while the rest of the team gradually departed. Richard was right about one thing, she observed. You have changed. There's a certainty in your decisions now that wasn't there before. Clarity of purpose, I suggested. For 15 years, I subordinated my ambitions to Richard's career. Now I'm reclaiming not just my father's legacy, but my own path. And Richard? Does seeing him brought low satisfy that desire for justice you've carried since your father's patents were stolen? I considered her question carefully. This isn't primarily about satisfaction, Nadia. It's about correction. Restoring proper ownership and direction to technology that should never have been separated from its creator's vision. And the fact that it's happening through Richard's downfall? Appropriate symmetry, I acknowledged with the faintest smile. Though his self-destruction would have occurred eventually without my involvement, people who betray trust repeatedly, eventually, exhaust their opportunities. As we gathered our things to leave, my phone chimed with a final message for the evening, from Lowell. Board recommends accepting Chairman Mitchell's resignation tomorrow morning. Developments accelerating. Your consulting agreement ready when you are. I showed the message to Nadia, who raised her eyebrows in surprise. Mitchell resigning already? Richard's revelation about his involvement must have had more substance than we thought. Indeed, I agreed. And with both CEO and chairman positions in transition simultaneously, the company becomes even more vulnerable to our acquisition strategy, she completed my thought. The perfect storm we've been cultivating. As we rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I reflected on the day's rapid developments. In less than 24 hours, Richard had gone from confident CEO to suspended executive under investigation. The board leadership was in upheaval, Meridian's stock was plummeting, and Phase 3 of our plan hadn't even officially begun. Tomorrow, I told Nadia as we reached our cars, we activate the shareholder approach. With Mitchell and Richard both removed, institutional investors will be seeking stability and direction. Which we'll provide, she confirmed with quiet confidence, along with a compelling vision for Meridian's future, one that honors its founding, technology while charting a more ethically sound path forward. As I drove home through the quiet night streets, I felt none of the conflicted emotions conventional wisdom might expect from someone orchestrating their ex-husband's professional downfall. Instead, I experienced the focused clarity that comes from pursuing long-delayed justice, not just for my father's stolen legacy or my own discarded marriage, but for the proper alignment of actions and consequences. Richard had made his choices, repeatedly prioritizing personal gain over partnership, propriety, or principle. Now he would experience the natural results of those choices, magnified by the strategic leverage I'd spent years carefully accumulating. The chess pieces were aligned precisely as needed for our next series of moves. And unlike Richard, we were prepared not just for the immediate play, but for the endgame well beyond. The financial news networks had a single focus when markets opened: Meridian Technologies' leadership crisis. Analyst panels debated the implications of Richard's suspension and Mitchell's resignation, while stock tickers showed Meridian shares down 22% and falling. Perfect volatility, Tariq observed, monitoring trading patterns across multiple screens. Our purchasing algorithms are activating at the predetermined thresholds. I nodded, watching our positions steadily increase as institutional investors panic-sold their holdings. Have we identified which funds are liquidating most aggressively? Wellington and BlackRock are reducing exposure significantly, he confirmed. Smaller funds are following their lead. Institutional herd mentality, Nadia remarked. When market leaders retreat, others follow without independent analysis. Our secure line rang. Lowell again, earlier than expected. Elena, he began, tension evident in his usually controlled voice. The board has requested your presence at Meridian headquarters this morning, officially as a consultant regarding the technical implications of the canceled Vertex acquisition. That's an unexpected acceleration of our discussion yesterday, I noted. What's driving the urgency? Several major shareholders are demanding immediate guidance on Meridian's path forward, given both Richard's and Mitchell's departures. Your father's legacy with the company holds particular significance right now. Interesting. The board was already leveraging my connection to Anton Vasilyev as a stabilizing narrative. I can be there at 11, I replied, catching Nadia's eye, and gesturing for the team to prepare for this development. Thank you, Lowell said, genuine relief in his tone. We'll have the consulting agreement ready for your review. The board is meeting continuously through this situation. After ending the call, I addressed the team. Change of plans. I'm meeting the Meridian board in 2 hours, officially as a technical consultant, unofficially as a reassuring connection to the company's founding technology. They're more desperate than we anticipated, Marcus observed. This accelerates our timeline significantly. Are we prepared for direct engagement? Kai asked. Our ownership position is still below the disclosure threshold. Precisely why this invitation works to our advantage, I explained. I'll be inside their crisis management process while our acquisition position continues to build. Dual leverage points. We spent the next hour refining our approach. By the time I departed for Meridian headquarters, Our strategy had been updated to capitalize on this unexpected opportunity. Rather than approaching institutional investors individually as originally planned, we would now position ourselves as the stabilizing force the board itself was seeking. The Meridian building had a different energy as I passed through security, tension, evident in the heightened ID verification procedures and the hushed conversations that ceased when employees noticed visitors. The executive floor, normally bustling with activity, felt eerily subdued. Richard's assistant, not Amber, but the replacement hired after her promotion, looked up with visible relief when I arrived. "Ms. Vasilyev," she greeted me, using my maiden name automatically. "Mr. Lowell and the board are expecting you. This way, please." She led me not to the standard meeting room where I'd observed yesterday's confrontation, but to the chairman's private conference suite, a space I'd visited only twice during my marriage to Richard, both times for major company milestones. The symbolism wasn't subtle. The board was literally placing me in the founder's tradition rather than Richard's executive sphere. Inside, 7 board members sat around the polished table, with Lowell occupying the interim CEO position rather than Mitchell's chairman's seat, which remained conspicuously empty. Their expressions as I entered ranged from relief to careful assessment. "Elena, thank you for joining us on such short notice," Lowell began, gesturing to the open chair directly opposite his, another symbolic placement. "The situation has evolved rapidly since our conversation yesterday. So I've gathered," I replied, taking the offered seat, though I'm still unclear on how my technical expertise relates to leadership transitions. Chen, the most analytical of the board members, addressed this directly. "We're facing questions about Meridian's technological direction following the canceled Vertex acquisition. Your understanding of both our core encryption architecture and current market alternatives provides valuable perspective during this transition. While technically accurate, it was clearly partial justification. The unspoken reality hung in the air. They were seeking connection to Meridian's more reputable past to offset the current governance scandal." I noted the consulting agreement positioned discreetly before my seat. A quick scan confirmed standard terms with generous compensation, and notably, no non-compete provisions that might interfere with our acquisition strategy. "Before we proceed," I said, meeting each board member's gaze deliberately, "I want to address the obvious concern. My recent divorce from Richard creates potential perception issues regarding my involvement during this sensitive period." Hamilton, always the most direct, nodded appreciatively. "We've discussed this extensively. Our conclusion is that your technical expertise and historical connection to Meridian's founding technology outweigh any temporary discomfort regarding your personal situation. Additionally," Chen added, "your father's reputation for integrity provides valuable association during a governance crisis." The invocation of my father was becoming a theme, one I could leverage effectively. "I appreciate your confidence," I replied, signing the agreement with deliberate calm. "Now, perhaps you could brief me on the most pressing technical concerns following the Vertex cancellation." For the next hour, the discussion remained officially focused on technology roadmaps and alternative acquisition targets. I provided measured insights, careful to balance demonstrating expertise with maintaining appropriate consultant boundaries. Throughout, I observed the board dynamics, noting which members deferred to others, who seemed most concerned about market perception, who prioritized operational stability. Eventually, Lowell steered the conversation toward what I suspected was the real purpose of my invitation. "Elena, we're planning a market communication strategy to address investor concerns," he explained. "Given your unique position as both a technical expert and someone with historical connection to Meridian's founding, we're considering having you participate in select investor discussions." And there it was. They wanted to use my name and connection to stabilize the very investor relationships we were targeting. "That would be quite unusual for a consultant," I observed neutrally. "These are unusual circumstances," Chen countered. Our preliminary outreach indicates that major institutional investors would respond positively to narrative continuity between Meridian's founding technology and its future direction. I appeared to consider this carefully, though it aligned perfectly with our accelerated strategy. I would need to understand precisely what messaging you're proposing. My professional reputation requires clear boundaries between historical context and current corporate governance. Absolutely, Lowell agreed quickly. We're not suggesting you defend or explain recent events. Simply provide technological context and vision that transcends temporary leadership changes. I'd need to review the specific investor presentation before committing, I stipulated, establishing appropriate professional boundaries while internally recognizing the perfect opportunity being presented. The meeting concluded with a clear calendar of next steps, review sessions for the investor presentation, scheduled calls with key institutional shareholders, technical briefings on alternative acquisition targets. Within a single morning, I had secured legitimate access to Meridian's most sensitive strategic discussions and direct contact with the very investors our acquisition strategy targeted. As Lowell walked me out personally, another symbolic gesture, visible to employees throughout the executive floor, he spoke quietly. There's something I didn't mention with the full board present. Richard has been attempting to contact several board members directly, suggesting your involvement represents a personal vendetta rather than professional expertise. That's not unexpected, I replied calmly. Richard struggles with accountability. Attributing his current situation to external conspiracies rather than his own actions is consistent with that pattern. Lowell nodded agreement. The board isn't giving his accusations credence. However, I thought you should be aware in case he makes similar claims to industry contacts. I appreciate the transparency, I said as we reached the elevator. Though I suspect Richard's professional credibility is somewhat diminished at present. Significantly diminished, Lowell confirmed with grim satisfaction. The preliminary investigation has already uncovered additional financial irregularities beyond the Vertex situation. This was valuable intelligence. Richard's problems were expanding beyond what we'd initially documented. That's unfortunate for Meridian, I offered diplomatically. But perhaps fortunate in accelerating necessary changes, Lowell suggested as the elevator arrived. We'll have the investor presentation to you by this evening. Thank you again, Elena. When I returned to our office, the team was waiting with updates from their respective monitoring areas. Tariq's financial tracking showed our ownership position had reached 28%, approaching but still below the regulatory disclosure threshold. Zoe had detected Richard attempting to access Meridian systems through outdated credentials. Emily reported financial media increasingly characterizing the situation as a governance collapse, rather than isolated misconduct. I briefed them on the board meeting outcomes, particularly the unexpected opportunity to directly address institutional investors. They're literally inviting us inside their stabilization strategy, Marcus observed with professional appreciation. Creating legitimate access to the very shareholders we plan to approach independently. It accelerates our timeline by weeks, Nadia confirmed, and provides credibility that would have required significant effort to establish otherwise. We need to calibrate our approach carefully, I cautioned. If we move too aggressively, the board will recognize our acquisition intent before we're positioned optimally. For the remainder of the day, we refined our dual-track strategy, balancing my consulting role, providing legitimate value to Meridian, while simultaneously advancing our control position through continued share acquisitions and institutional investor engagement. The investor presentation arrived from Lowell that evening, a comprehensive overview of Meridian's renewed focus on core technologies, with heavy emphasis on the company's founding innovations. My suggested role included providing historical context on the encryption architecture and perspective on current market applications. After reviewing it with Marcus to ensure no conflicts with our acquisition strategy, I approved my participation, with minor modifications. The presentation effectively positioned me as the bridge between Meridian's accomplished past and potential future. Exactly the narrative we needed for approaching institutional investors. The following morning brought another unexpected development. Financial news networks reported Richard had been formally terminated for cause following preliminary investigation findings. The board had unanimously revoked his golden parachute, based on documented violations of fiduciary duty, securities regulations, and company ethics policies. They moved faster than projected, Nadia noted as we watched the coverage. Normally, these investigations take weeks, not days. They likely already had substantial evidence, Marcus suggested. Our documentation merely triggered the investigation. That confirmed what some board members suspected. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "This is your doing. You'll regret taking this so far." I showed the message to the team without comment. The desperate threat required no response. Richard was now officially separated from Meridian without financial cushioning, his reputation in tatters, his future prospects severely limited. Should we be concerned about potential retaliation? Kai asked. Monitor, but don't overreact, I instructed. Richard's capabilities are significantly reduced without corporate resources behind him. Lowell called shortly after, confirming the termination announcement and informing me that the investor calls would begin that afternoon, accelerated from the original timeline due to market volatility. Our strategy would need to adapt accordingly. The first institutional investor call was with Wellington Capital, which had reduced its Meridian position significantly following the leadership crisis. The fund manager, Catherine Powell, was known for blunt questioning and limited patience with corporate turmoil. Ms. Vasilyev, she began after introductions and Lowell's opening remarks. While I appreciate Meridian's historical technological significance, my concern is more immediate. The governance failures suggest fundamental oversight problems that technical expertise alone cannot address. A valid concern, I acknowledged, establishing candor rather than defensive corporate positioning. Which is why viewing this situation in proper context matters. Meridian's core technology architecture, the quantum encryption foundation my father developed, remains industry-leading and properly protected. The governance issues related specifically to an ill-conceived acquisition, not to the fundamental business model or technology roadmap. Yet 2 senior leaders departed simultaneously, she countered, suggesting systemic issues rather than isolated misjudgment. Or suggesting appropriate accountability functioning as designed, I responded. Corporate governance worked precisely, as it should, identifying problematic decisions before they caused irreparable harm and taking decisive corrective action. The conversation continued in this vein, with Powell gradually shifting from skepticism to cautious engagement as I provided specific technical context for Meridian's market position independent of recent leadership turmoil. By the call's conclusion, she indicated Wellington was re-evaluating their position based on our discussion, code for potentially halting their divestment. Similar calls with other institutional investors followed throughout the day, each requiring careful calibration between providing legitimate value as Meridian's consultant while subtly positioning for our eventual acquisition proposal. By evening, market analysts were noting unusual stability returning to Meridian stock after days of decline. "We've effectively stopped the bleeding for them," Tariq observed as we reviewed financial data after the market closed. "Which serves our purposes perfectly." Stabilization creates space for considered transactions rather than panic selling, I agreed. Our final accumulation can proceed at optimal pricing. Over the next 2 days, our dual-track strategy continued gaining momentum. My consulting role with Meridian established increasing credibility with both the board and institutional investors. Meanwhile, our ownership position methodically increased through carefully structured purchases, reaching 31% by the 3rd morning, beyond the threshold requiring regulatory disclosure, but still implemented through entities that obscured the consolidated ownership. The disclosure filing would need to be submitted within 10 days, creating our natural timeline for revealing our true position and intentions. On the morning of the 4th day after Richard's termination, my regular consulting meeting with Lowell took an unexpected turn. The board is accelerating its CEO search process, he informed me as we reviewed technical roadmaps in his office. Several candidates have been identified, including 2 internal options. That provides valuable stability signaling for the market, I noted professionally. Indeed. He hesitated briefly. Which brings me to a somewhat delicate question. Several board members have suggested considering you for a formal leadership role, potentially as Chief Technology Officer or even CEO. Though I had anticipated this possibility in our scenario planning, its actual emergence required careful navigation. That's quite a leap from consulting on technical matters, I observed neutrally. Not when considering your qualifications alongside Meridian's specific needs, Lowell countered. Your technical expertise is unquestioned. Your industry connections are extensive, and you have unique perspective on both Meridian's founding principles and current market position. There would be obvious concerns about my recent connection to Richard, I reminded him, which the board views as increasingly irrelevant given the comprehensive evidence of his misconduct, Lowell replied. If anything, your distance from his decision-making is now seen as beneficial. I allowed an appropriate hesitation. I'm honored by the board's confidence. However, any such consideration would require careful discussion of vision alignment and governance expectations. Precisely what a formal exploratory conversation would address, he agreed readily. Would you be open to that discussion with the full board tomorrow morning? Yes, I confirmed, recognizing the perfect opportunity to advance our end-stage strategy. Though I would want complete transparency about Meridian's current position and challenges, absolutely, he assured me. We'll provide comprehensive briefing materials today. When I returned to our office and shared this development, the team recognized its strategic significance immediately. They're literally inviting you to present our vision for Meridian's future, Nadia observed with quiet satisfaction. Creating the perfect platform for our acquisition proposal. The timing aligns precisely with our disclosure requirement, Marcus added. We can reveal our ownership position as part of the leadership discussion rather than as a separate regulatory surprise. This accelerates everything, I agreed. We'll need to finalize the full proposal packet tonight for presentation tomorrow. The team worked with focused intensity throughout the day and into evening, transforming our acquisition strategy into a comprehensive leadership vision. Rather than positioning as external acquirers, we would present as aligned investors with a unified vision for returning Meridian to its founding principles while expanding its market applications. By morning, everything was prepared. Presentation, materials, legal documentation, financial projections. Our consolidated 34% ownership would be revealed alongside a vision for Meridian's future that honored my father's original technology while addressing current market realities. As I prepared to leave for the board meeting, Diana called with one final piece of perfect timing. Elena, she began with professional satisfaction. Richard's attorney has withdrawn their threats regarding the divorce settlement. Apparently, Richard's financial position has become suddenly precarious with the termination of his golden parachute. Not surprising, I replied. His lifestyle was built on projected compensation that no longer exists. There's more, Diana continued. My sources indicate he's been approaching former colleagues about employment opportunities without success. His industry reputation appears significantly damaged. I absorbed this information without the vindictive satisfaction Richard would likely have expected. His downfall wasn't my objective, merely the natural consequence of his own actions and necessary precursor to reclaiming my father's legacy. Thank you for the update, I said simply. It seems all pieces are falling into their proper places. Arriving at Meridian headquarters for the board meeting, I noticed a different atmosphere. Employees nodding with something approaching respect or recognition rather than the curious uncertainty of previous visits. My connection to the company's founding technology had apparently become common knowledge, creating a narrative of continuation rather than disruption. The boardroom had been rearranged for this meeting, with presentation capabilities activated, and several additional staff present to manage technical details. All 7 board members were seated, expressions ranging from polite interest to obvious anticipation. "Elena," Lowell greeted me, gesturing toward what would have been the CEO's position at the table. "Thank you for joining us for this important discussion about Meridian's future leadership." "I appreciate the opportunity," I replied, setting my materials at the designated place but remaining standing to establish presentation authority. Before we begin discussing potential leadership roles, however, there's important context I need to share with the board. Lowell's expression showed slight confusion at this deviation from expected protocol. "Of course, please proceed." I nodded to the technical staff, who connected my secure drive to the presentation system. The first slide appeared, a simple ownership structure showing our consolidated 34% position in Meridian Technologies. "Over the past year," I began with calm authority, "I have systematically constructed a significant ownership position in Meridian through various investment entities. As of this morning, I control 34% of outstanding shares, making me the company's largest shareholder." The board members' reactions ranged from shock to sudden comprehension. Chen was the first to recover, her analytical mind immediately processing implications. "This changes the nature of our discussion considerably," she observed with professional restraint. "It aligns our interests more directly," I corrected gently. "My investment demonstrates absolute commitment to Meridian's future success, far beyond a conventional executive role." "This position has been built deliberately over time," Lowell noted, connecting recent events to this revelation. "Not simply responding to current circumstances." "Correct," I confirmed. "My objective has been consistent throughout, to reclaim my father's technological legacy and restore the vision that guided Meridian's founding before subsequent leadership diversions." For the next hour, I presented our comprehensive plan for Meridian's future, technical roadmaps, market positioning, governance improvements, and leadership structure. Throughout, I emphasized continuity with the company's founding principles while addressing current market realities with innovative approaches. When I concluded, the boardroom remained silent for several moments as members processed the magnitude of what I'd presented. Finally, Hamilton broke the silence with characteristic directness. "You've effectively executed a quiet acquisition of controlling influence," he observed without accusation. "And now present us with a comprehensive vision that appears both technically sound and strategically aligned with Meridian's core strengths." "I've invested significantly in Meridian's future," I corrected gently, "and developed a vision for returning to its founding principles while expanding its market impact." "The regulatory disclosures will be filed today?" Chen inquired, ever focused on governance requirements. "Already submitted this morning," I confirmed. "Complete transparency about ownership structure and intentions moving forward." "And your proposed role in this restructured organization?" Lowell asked the essential question. "Executive chairperson," I replied, "working with a CEO selected for operational excellence rather than technological vision. Complementary skills serving a unified strategy." The discussion continued for another hour. Detailed questions about implementation timing, market messaging, leadership transitions. Throughout, I maintained the careful balance between confident vision and collaborative engagement that had characterized our strategy from the beginning. When the board finally called for a brief recess to discuss privately, Lowell walked me to a waiting area outside the boardroom. "You've been planning this for years," he observed quietly. "Not months, years." "I've been working to reclaim my father's legacy since I understood it had been taken," I acknowledged. The specific strategy evolved as circumstances changed. Including your marriage to Richard? That began as genuine, I replied truthfully. The strategic elements emerged gradually as I observed his approach to business and ethics. Lowell nodded. Slowly. And now Richard has lost everything: position, reputation, financial security, while you're positioned to take control of the company built on your father's technology. Actions have consequences, I noted without malice. Mine, Richard's, the board's, all creating this current configuration of possibilities. He studied me with new understanding. He never really knew you, did he? All those years. He saw what he expected to see, I replied simply. A supporting character in his narrative rather than the architect of my own. The boardroom door opened, and Chen beckoned us to return. The members had resumed their seats, expressions now resolved rather than conflicted. The board has reached a unanimous decision, Hamilton announced formally. We accept your proposed vision and leadership structure for Meridian's future, subject to standard regulatory approvals and shareholder ratification. We believe this approach honors Meridian's technological foundation while addressing current market challenges, Chen added with uncharacteristic warmth, and provides appropriate continuity during this transition period. As the details were confirmed and next steps established, I maintained professional focus while internally acknowledging the culmination of a journey that had begun years earlier at my father's deathbed, his innovations stolen, his legacy diverted, his daughter determined to restore proper ownership and direction. The meeting concluded with handshakes and scheduling of formal announcements. As I gathered my materials, my phone showed a missed call from Richard and subsequent text. Just saw the stock alert about major ownership disclosure. What have you done? I didn't respond. His question would be answered within hours when Meridian announced its new leadership structure and strategic direction, with Anton Vasilyev's daughter at the helm, reclaiming not just her father's technology, but her own rightful place in the narrative. The official press release would go out that afternoon. Financial networks would analyze the unexpected development extensively. Industry publications would note the elegant symmetry of Meridian returning to its founding family's vision. And somewhere, in a suddenly too expensive apartment, Richard would be watching the announcement, finally understanding that while he had been focused on replacing me with his younger assistant, I had been methodically positioning to replace him with something far more substantial: justice, restoration, and the reclamation of what had always rightfully belonged to the Vasilyev. Legacy. 1 month after leaving me for his secretary, my husband wasn't just begging for his job, he was watching me take control of the entire company he thought he owned. Actions, as I had often reminded him during our marriage, have consequences. His had finally caught up with him. Mine had only just begun to unfold. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.